I am Major Alex Ross, 38 years old. 3 weeks ago, I stood in the oak-paneled room of Ember House, looking coldly at my brother as he stumbled around, waving a glass of whiskey. In front of 30 guests, he screamed at me not to eat too much because I hadn't paid a single cent for our parents' anniversary party. Aunt Denise gave a sharp, mocking clap and said to let the real family enjoy themselves. And my parents? They hung their heads, choosing silence like cowards. I set my napkin down, grabbed my daughter's hand, and walked out. 60 minutes later, the manager walked into the room with a black leather folder, and the whole table went silent. Before I tell you exactly what went wrong at that table, take a second to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from. Now, let's rewind to 3 weeks before, 16:20 hours on a Thursday at the military base. My phone buzzed. One word on the screen. Mom. The computer fan in my office was rattling, a dry rhythmic clicking that felt like a needle against my temple. I didn't pick up on the first ring, or the second. I let it vibrate against the laminate desk, right next to the pinewood frame I'd picked up at a truck stop in Pennsylvania. Inside that frame, my 7-year-old Mia was grinning, her eyes bright and untainted by the mess I called a family. I finally pressed the phone to my ear. "Ross," I said. My voice was level, the way it always is when I'm on duty. "Alex, honey?" My mother's voice was thin, a high-pitched whine that skipped the small talk. She didn't ask about the field exercise I'd just wrapped up. She didn't ask if I'd had a decent meal or if Mia was doing okay in school. "Your father's 35th anniversary is coming up," she started. Her tone shifted into that familiar, practiced mournfulness. "Mason was supposed to handle the restaurant, but you know how he is. His construction company is... well, it's a lot of pressure. He's just so swamped, Alex. He hasn't got a minute to breathe." I leaned back, staring at the gray ceiling tiles. Swamped. That's what she called it. I called it a 40-year-old man who still acted like a pampered teenager. Mason Calloway was the golden child, the son who could do no wrong even while he was running his business into a ditch. "He's swamped," I repeated. The irony tasted like copper. "I'm sure you've got some of that extra money saved up," Mom continued. She wasn't asking, she was dumping her trash on my lawn. "From when you were... overseas?" I looked down at my hands. They were steady. But inside, something was hardening. She was talking about my hazard pay. That money wasn't a bonus. It was the price of the nights I'd spent in a bunker in the Middle East, listening to the hum of sandstorms and the distant thud of things no mother should ever want her daughter to know about. I knew the math. I'm a logistics officer. I always know the math. My dad's firm was underwater, suffocating under high-interest loans and Mason's incompetence. If I didn't step in, the anniversary wouldn't just be canceled, their whole house of cards might come down. "I'll handle it," I said, my thumb tracing the edge of Mia's photo. "Oh, good. I knew we could count on you to be the big sister, Alex. You're so..." I didn't wait for the thank you that wasn't going to be sincere anyway. I ended the call. The next morning, the air in Pennsylvania was biting and damp. I walked into Ember House at 0900 sharp. The place smelled of expensive furniture polish, aged oak, and the kind of old money confidence that usually didn't want people in fatigues around. Camilla Ortiz, the manager, met me in the lobby. She was sharp, dark suit, hair pulled back tight, eyes that assessed my boots and my rank before she even opened her mouth. I liked her immediately. She looked like the kind of woman who knew how to hold a perimeter. 30 guests, I said, sliding the event request across the mahogany counter. Full dinner service, top shelf bar. I want the oak room. Camilla raised an eyebrow. That's a significant commitment, Major. We require a deposit up front to hold the date. I know. I pulled my personal credit card from my wallet. It felt heavy, cold. I watched her slide it through the POS machine. The screen flickered, processed, and then gave a sharp, green, authorized beep. $1,500. Gone in a second. Camilla handed me the contract. "Sign here, please." I gripped the pen. I wrote my name, Major Alex Ross, Not Mason, not the Calloway family. Just me. I made sure that ink was dark and unmistakable. As she went to file the paperwork, I leaned in. My voice dropped an octave, the tone I used when I needed a private to listen or get left behind. "Camilla," I said. She paused, looking at me. "My brother, Mason, is going to show up here eventually. He's going to try to put his name on this. He might even try to offer you $100 or some pathetic contribution so he can tell people he's the one running the show." Camilla's eyes didn't flicker. She just waited. "Do not take a single cent from him," I said, my voice as hard as a steel plate. "This contract stays in my name only. If he tries to change a single detail on that bill, you call me, you understand?" A small knowing smile tugged at the corner of Camilla's mouth. She took my card, tucked the receipt into her vest pocket, and nodded once. "Loud and clear, Major. Your brother won't be finding any glory here." I walked out of the restaurant and into the bright, cold morning. My chest felt tight, but for the first time in years, it wasn't from the weight of their expectations. It was the feeling of a trap being set. Mason wanted to play the big shot? Fine. I was gonna let him walk right into the middle of the field. I just didn't realize yet that the first person to pull the trigger wouldn't be Mason. It would be the woman who gave me life. 2 weeks before the dinner. I was at my parents' house, carrying a tape measure like it was a sidearm. I told them I was there to check the dimensions for the anniversary banners. A lie? I was there to scout the terrain. 12 years in the Army teaches you that the person smiling at the front door usually has a lockpick in their back pocket. I moved through the hallway like a ghost. No floorboard creaked under my boots. Habit of the uniform. The house smelled of stale floral potpourri and the slow rot of things unsaid. As I reached the living room, a low, gravelly mumble drifted from the kitchen. My father. Then a sharp, frantic hiss. My mother. I stopped. I didn't breathe. I just listened. "We transferred the 18 grand this morning," my father said. His voice sounded like he'd been swallowing glass. "That covers Mason's back taxes and the lien on his truck. But that's it, Linda. The well is dry." "It has to be enough," my mother whispered, her voice vibrating with a desperate, sick kind of devotion. "If Mason loses that construction firm, he's got nothing. Tiffany will leave him. We can't let him fail." "And Alex?" Dad asked. A pause, a cold, hollow silence that felt like a winter wind blowing through my chest. "Don't let Alex know," Mom snapped. "Not a word. Let her finish paying for the party first. If she thinks we've got money to spare, she'll stop writing the checks. We need her to keep covering the overhead until Mason gets back on his feet." I stood frozen in the hallway. $18,000. My parents were drowning in debt, or so they told me. I'd been skipping meals at the mess hall, grinding out extra shifts, and draining my hazard pay to keep their lights on. And all that time, they were funneling my sweat and blood into Mason's burning wreck of a life. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. A soldier doesn't fire until the target is locked. I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The next afternoon, the humidity was thick enough to chew. I met Mason at a Greasy Spoon diner on the edge of town. He brought Tiffany. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage and enough cheap saccharine perfume to make my eyes water. Mason sat there, leaning back in the vinyl booth, his belly straining against a polo shirt that was one size too small. He looked soft, undisciplined. A man who had never sacrificed a thing in his life, but expected the world to hand him a trophy for breathing. "Listen, Al," Mason said, huffing a cloud of onion ring breath in my direction. He puffed out his chest, trying to look like a commander while sitting in a pool of fry grease. "About the party, just make sure you tell the restaurant to put my name on the final invoice. Tiff and we're gonna handle the heavy lifting. We want the credit for this one. It's a legacy thing." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the hollow cowardice hiding behind the layers of fat and the fake tan. He was a practitioner of stolen valor, not for medals, but for life. He wanted to be the general on paper without ever stepping into the mud. "The heavy lifting," I repeated. My voice was a flat line. "Yeah," he grinned, squeezing Tiffany's hand. You've been away so much, playing soldier in the desert. You don't really get how things work here. Family sticks together. I'm the man of the house now. I take the lead. I looked at the coffee in front of me. Black, bitter, cold, just like the truth. I didn't tell him I knew about the 18 grand. I didn't tell him I'd already locked the contract at Ember House. I just let him play his little game of pretend. Are you listening to this? Does this sound familiar? If you've ever been the one in your family who does all the work while someone else grabs the microphone and the credit, I want to hear from you. Support the channel by hitting that like button right now and comment the word breadwinner if you're the one holding the fort while they're playing games. Your stories are what keep this mission going. I stood up. I didn't finish the coffee. I pulled a crumpled $20 bill from my pocket and tossed it onto the table. It was more than enough for the 3 lukewarm cups of brown water we'd shared. Consider it a donation, I said, for a man who's about to run out of time. I walked out before he could process the insult. 4 days before the party, my burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered, and the screech of Aunt Denise hit my eardrum like a serrated blade. I don't know if you quite grasp the weight of what Mason is doing for your parents, Alexandra, she shrilled. She didn't call, she lectured. While you're off in some godforsaken hole in the ground playing with guns, your brother is here, actually taking care of this family. You should be grateful he's willing to step up since you're never around to be a real daughter. My jaw tightened so hard I thought my molars might shatter. She just spat on my uniform. She just turned my years of service into a hobby. Adam, my husband, was leaning against the doorframe of our kitchen. He'd seen me go through deployments, seen me come home with sand in my pores and ghosts in my eyes. He didn't tell me to calm down. He didn't tell me to be the bigger person. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and steady. Whatever you decide to do at that dinner, Adam said, his voice as sharp as a bayonet. I've got your back. Just say the word. I looked at the calendar on the fridge. The date for the anniversary was circled in red. It wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a countdown. The word is contact, I whispered. I picked up the phone and dialed Camilla Ortiz at the restaurant. It was time to move the pieces into position. 1600 hours. I stepped into the oak room of Ember House 3 hours before the first guest was scheduled to arrive. Outside, the Pennsylvania humidity was a wet blanket, but in here, the air was crisp, sterile, and smelled of lemon oil and old money. My boots felt heavy on the plush carpet, a military footprint in a civilian cathedral of excess. I stood straight, shoulders back, eyes scanning the room like I was checking for snipers. Camilla Ortiz was already there. She didn't offer a greeting. She didn't have to. She just handed me a small plastic card, laminated and cold to the touch. If things go south, you've got 60 minutes from the moment you call, she said. Her voice was flat, professional, and dry as a desert wind. I nodded once. I slid the card behind my military ID in my wallet. To any civilian, it was just a business card. To me, it was the firing pin. I felt the weight of it against my hip as the first of the catering staff began to move chairs. The guests started trickling in by 17:30. Mason was at the head of the formation, his chest puffed out so far his cheap polyester suit buttons were screaming for mercy. He was working the room like a politician on a campaign trail, shaking hands, slapping backs, grinning with that fake orange tan glowing under the crystal chandeliers. He was playing the part of the big shot, the provider, the hero of a story he hadn't even bothered to write. He smelled of over-applied cologne and unearned confidence. 1845 hours. That was when the first breach in the perimeter happened. My 7-year-old Mia had been sitting quietly in the corner, her tongue poked out in concentration as she finished a crayon drawing on a piece of wax paper. It was a butterfly. Bright blues and yellows, messy but full of life. She hopped off her chair, her eyes shining with that pure, untainted hope kids have before the world decides to grind them down. She ran toward the main table where my mother, Linda, was holding court. "Grandma, look, I made this for you," Mia chirped. She held up the drawing like it was a holy relic. Linda started to reach out, her face softening for a split second. I saw the grandmother in her. But then Aunt Denise leaned in. Denise didn't even look at the drawing. She looked at Linda, her eyes like two cold marbles. "Linda," Denise snapped, her voice like a whip. "The appetizers are out and the Hendersons just walked in. Get back to the head table, now." My mother froze. She looked at Denise. She looked at her 7-year-old granddaughter. And then, she made her choice. Linda pulled her hand back, her eyes dropping to the white linen tablecloth. She didn't say a word. She didn't even look Mia in the eye. She just turned her chair away, leaving Mia standing there alone in the middle of the floor with her butterfly. Mia's smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. Her small fingers curled, mangling the edges of the wax paper. The sound of that paper crumbling was louder to me than a mortar blast. I was across the room in 3 strides. I dropped to my knees, ignored the stares of 30 relatives, and pulled her into my chest. I could feel her heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into her hair. My jaw was so tight I thought my teeth might shatter into rebar. 1927 hours. The main course was served. Mason stood up, his face already flushed red from the 3rd whiskey he'd put away. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, and grating. "I just want to say," Mason bellowed, his voice echoing off the oak-paneled walls, "that Tiff and I wanted this night to be perfect. We spent months picking this place, making sure the menu was right because Mom and Dad deserve the best. It's a lot of work, and it sure as hell isn't cheap, but family is worth every penny." The table erupted in polite applause, 30 heads nodding in agreement, looking at Mason like he was the second coming of George Washington. Denise raised her glass, her eyes locking onto mine across the room. She looked victorious. "To the real family," Denise toasted, her voice dripping with poison. "The ones who stay. The ones who are here through the thick and the thin. Not the ones who send a postcard once a year from some sandbox. Real family is presence. Cheers." My mother didn't look up. My father, Robert, stared at his steak as if he were trying to count the grains of salt on it. They were cowards. They were sitting there, eating the food I paid for, listening to my brother lie about the money I earned, and they said nothing. They let her spit on my uniform. 2008 hours. Mason was officially drunk. He stumbled toward my table, a glass of whiskey sloshing in his hand. The room went quiet. Not a respectful quiet, a hungry quiet. People wanted to see the show. Mason leaned down, his breath smelling like cheap bourbon and old cigarettes. He let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Hey, Alex," he yelled, loud enough for the kitchen staff to hear. "Easy on the appetizers, kiddo. You're eating like you're on the front lines again. Just remember, you're on my tab tonight. Don't go broke on my dime, all right?" Denise started clapping, a slow rhythmic sound that echoed in the sudden, dead silence of the room. I looked at the 30 guests. I looked at my silent parents. I looked at Mason's sweating, arrogant face. And then, I felt it. A tiny, cold click in the back of my brain. It was the sound of a safety being turned off. The sound of a treaty being torn into pieces. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. The ceasefire was officially over. 2008 hours. The air in the oak room didn't just feel thick. It felt solidified, like wet concrete setting around my lungs. Mason stood there, swaying slightly, his face a blotchy, drunken red, that half-empty whiskey glass trembling in his hand. The silence that followed his scream about me not paying was absolute. It was a hungry, predatory silence from 30 guests who had just been handed a front-row seat to a family execution. Aunt Denise sat at the head table, her chin tilted up, wearing a look of smug, venomous satisfaction as she started a slow, rhythmic clap. I didn't move. I didn't blink. In those 4 seconds of stillness, time didn't just slow down, it fractured. I wasn't looking at my brother or my aunt anymore. I was an operator analyzing a kill zone. I saw Mason for exactly what he was, a target standing in the middle of an open minefield, trying to bury his own insolvency by stomping on my neck to impress his wife, Tiffany. I saw Denise, drunk on a brand of rotting patriarchal power that she used to keep everyone under her thumb. And then I looked at my parents, Robert and Linda. the people who were supposed to be my rear guard. They sat there with their heads down, staring at their expensive steaks like they were hoping the floor would open up and swallow them whole. 38 years. That's how long I'd spent hauling their weight, believing there was a home behind me worth defending. In those 4 seconds, that illusion didn't just break, it burned to ash. They weren't a support system. They were the ones who had been feeding me to the wolves just to keep the house quiet. A small cold tug on my sleeve broke the trance. I looked down. Mia was looking up at me, her big eyes glassed over with a kind of confusion no 7-year-old should ever have to process. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Denise's clapping. "Does Grandma love us? Sometimes the grown-ups let people be mean. And it makes everyone feel real small. That ain't right, is it?" The words were a serrated blade across my heart. I looked at my mother, the woman who had just turned her back on this child's drawing, and then back at my daughter. I realized right then that if I didn't move now, I was teaching Mia how to be a victim. I was teaching her that love meant accepting abuse. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and hard as a rifle stock as I squeezed her hand. "Loving someone don't ever mean you gotta let 'em make you feel small. Ever." I looked over at Adam. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He'd seen that look on my face before a night patrol. He just gave me a single, sharp nod. "Take Mia to the car, honey," I said. I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. I took my linen napkin, folded it into a perfect, sharp-edged square, and set it precisely on the edge of my plate. I reached out and picked up Mia's mangled butterfly drawing. I could feel 31 pairs of eyes burning into me, waiting for the explosion, the screaming, the tears. I didn't give them a damn thing. I reached into my pocket, kinking Camilla's laminated card between my index and middle fingers like a playing card. I looked Mason dead in the eye, saw the flicker of fear behind his drunken bravado, and then scanned the rest of the table. "I hope you all have a hell of a night," I said. I turned on my heel and walked out. My boots made a rhythmic, heavy sound against the hardwood of the hallway. I didn't look back at the oak room. I didn't look back at the 38 years of lies. The October air in the Pennsylvania parking lot hit me like a physical blow, cold and damp and smelling of wet asphalt. I reached my SUV and pulled the heavy door open, the metal hinges letting out a sharp clack as the lock engaged. I sat in the driver's seat for a second, the engine off, listening to my own breathing. This wasn't a retreat. It was a tactical withdrawal. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card. Camilla picked up on the second ring. "Ross," she said. No greeting, just business. "Camilla," I said, my voice sounding like ice grinding against stone. "I need to revoke the authorization on my card immediately. Keep the $1,500 deposit. That's yours for the trouble." "Understood, Major," she replied. "And the rest of the bill?" "The remaining balance, the bar tab. And I want you to tack on a 20% gratuity for your staff," I said, looking at the glowing digital clock on my dash. "Take the whole damn invoice and hand it directly to the man named Mason Calloway. Tell him the bank is closed." "Time frame?" Camilla asked. "Do it at exactly 21:05, I said. "I want him to have just enough time to order one last round of top-shelf scotch before the floor drops out from under him." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I looked at the dark silhouette of the restaurant in the rearview mirror. Mason wanted the credit. He wanted to be the man in charge. Well, in about 40 minutes, he was going to find out exactly what it cost to stand at the head of the table when the bill comes due. The ceasefire was dead. The real war had just begun. My cousin Paul told me the rest later. 21:05 hours, exactly on the mark. Inside the oak room, the air was thick with the smell of expensive ribeye, heavy cream, and the sour fermented tang of too much top-shelf bourbon. Mason was leaning back, his tie loosened, laughing at some joke he'd probably stolen from a sitcom. He looked like a king in a paper crown. Then the heavy oak door swung open. Camilla Ortiz didn't just walk in, she marched. The sharp, rhythmic clack-clack-clack of her heels against the hardwood sounded like a firing squad taking their positions. The room didn't just go quiet, it froze. She was carrying a black leather folder, clutching it to her side like a military judge carrying a death warrant. She didn't look at the guests. She didn't look at the flowers. She walked straight to the head of the table, stopped 3 inches from Mason, and slammed that folder down on the glass top. The sound was like a gunshot. "Mr. Calloway," Camilla said. Her voice didn't just carry, it commanded. It was loud, flat, and echoed off the wood-paneled walls. As of 21:05, Major Alex Ross has officially revoked all credit authorizations for this event. Mason's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. He blinked. Once, twice. The drunken flush in his cheeks started to drain, replaced by a sickly gray pallor. The current balance for the Oak Room, including the full dinner service, the open bar, and the 20% gratuity for my staff, is $5,817, Camilla announced. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. Authorization for all further services is terminated. This room is reserved until 21:30. After that, the lights go down. The silence was absolute. 30 people. Not a single fork moved. Not a single breath was drawn. Paul said he could hear the hum of the air conditioner. Mason's mouth worked, but no sound came out for 3 long seconds. Then, the lying started. It was instinctive. Pathetic. There's a mistake," Mason stammered, his voice cracking like dry wood. He tried to puff his chest out, but he just looked like a punctured tire. We both set this up. Al probably just had a glitch with her bank. Some military pay issue. I'll handle it." Camilla didn't move a muscle. She reached into the folder and pulled out the thermal paper contract, sliding it across the table until it hit Mason's steak plate. "The contract is signed by Major Alex Ross," she said, her eyes like chips of flint. "She is the sole guarantor, and she just pulled the plug. I'm not here to discuss family politics, Mr. Calloway. I'm here for the $5,817. Now." Mason's hands were shaking, truly shaking. He reached for his back pocket, pulling out a wallet that looked far thinner than the one he'd been flaunting earlier. He pulled out a card. Gold, shiny, fake. He swiped it through the handheld POS Camilla was holding. "Beep, beep," declined. Mason's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Try it again. The machine is broken." Camilla swiped it again. "Beep, beep." He pulled out another one, a silver one this time. "Beep, beep." The sound of those double beeps was like a hammer hitting a nail into his coffin. 30 guests were watching. 30 people who he'd just told he was the big shot providing for everyone. Tiffany, his wife, sat next to him, her face a mask of cold, sharpening fury. She looked at the POS screen, then she looked at the husband she thought was a mogul. Mason reached for Tiffany's designer clutch. "Tiff, babe, just give me your..." Cack. Tiffany stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floorboards. She snatched her bag back, her eyes narrow and filled with a loathing that could have melted lead. "Mason," she said, her voice a razor-thin whisper that cut through the room. "What the hell have you been doing? You haven't contributed a single damn cent to this, have you? You're a fraud." Aunt Denise tried to open her mouth, probably to find some way to blame the restaurant, or me, or the government. But as she looked around the room, she saw the faces of the relatives. The glamour was gone. The golden child was just a bankrupt contractor standing in a puddle of his own making. People started looking away, turning their heads. The embarrassment was too thick to breathe. That's when the coward moved. My father, Robert, stood up. He didn't look at Mason. He didn't look at Camilla. He looked like a man who had been walking through a desert for 40 years and had finally run out of water. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. His construction company card. The one that was already maxed out, already drowning in high-interest debt. The one he was using to keep a dying business on life support. He handed it to Camilla. "Just take it," he whispered. Camilla swiped. The machine gave a long, steady green light. Authorized. Robert took the receipt. He didn't say a word to the guests. He didn't apologize. He just looked at Mason with eyes that were utterly, completely exhausted. "Go home, Mason," Robert said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the sound of a man who had finally realized he'd spent his life saving a son who wasn't worth the paper the money was printed on. Tiffany didn't wait. She grabbed her coat, not even looking at the husband she'd been bragging about 10 minutes ago. "I'm calling a separate car," she snapped over her shoulder as she walked toward the exit. "Don't bother calling me tonight or tomorrow." The Callaway line had officially broken. The formation was scattered. And as the lights in the Oak Room flickered, a signal from Camilla that the grace period was over, the real family scrambled for the door like rats off a sinking ship. It was over. But in the dark, the cowards were already planning their next move. 0900 hours, Monday morning. The air at the base tasted like burnt office coffee and cold diesel exhaust. I was hunched over a terminal, cross-referencing shipping manifests, when my phone started screaming. Not a ringtone, a high-pitched, jagged siren that only meant one thing. The perimeter at my house had been breached. I pulled the device from my tactical vest. My heart didn't race, it went cold. I tapped the app. The feed from the living room camera flickered to life in grainy black and white. There they were. Mason was standing in my entryway, looking twitchy, shifting his weight like a man who knew he was standing on a pressure plate. Beside him stood Aunt Denise. She wasn't twitchy. She was holding the spare key, the one I'd been stupid enough to give my parents for emergencies, like it was a scepter. She wasn't there for a welfare check. She was there for a raid. "Check the kitchen," I heard Denise's tinny voice through the phone's speaker. "Robert said she's got the good stuff in the hutch. If she's gonna treat this family like a business, we're gonna collect our dividends." Mason didn't hesitate. He followed her into the dining room. They didn't even wipe their boots on the rug. They walked right past the photos of Mia, past the life I'd built, and headed straight for the glass cabinet. Denise didn't just look. She reached in and pulled out the blue and white porcelain set. It was the only thing Adam's mother had left us. Hand-painted, fragile. It was the centerpiece of our home, the one thing we brought out when we wanted to feel like we belonged to something beautiful. She started wrapping the plates in a tattered moving blanket Mason had brought in. They weren't there to apologize for the dinner. They weren't there to make things right. They were there to strip the copper out of the walls because their egos were bruised. They figured family was a blank check for theft. I didn't yell at the screen. I didn't call Mason to beg. I hit the speed dial for Adam, then I hit 3 digits that meant more than any bloodline, 911. "Domestic burglary in progress," I told the dispatcher. My voice was a flat, lethal monotone. "2 suspects, armed with a stolen key. My husband is 3 minutes out. Send the cavalry." The next 20 minutes felt like a slow-motion car wreck on the monitor. I watched Adam's heavy-duty truck scream into the driveway, the tires throwing gravel against the siding. Right behind him, 2 patrol cars with their blue and red lights painting the neighborhood in a strobe of cold justice. Adam didn't wait for the officers. He slammed the front door open so hard the hinges groaned. Mason was halfway to the door, clutching the bundle of porcelain like a coward's prize. He froze. Adam didn't scream. He didn't have to. He stood there, 6'2" of solid muscle and raw protective fury, blocking the exit. He looked Mason dead in the eye, and for the first time in his life, my brother realized he wasn't playing a game of family drama anymore. He was in a tactical nightmare. "Drop the plates," Adam said. His voice was low, vibrating with a kind of violence that didn't need to be shouted. "Now, Adam, let's be reasonable," Denise started, her voice rising into that shrill, manipulative register she used to control my parents. She tried to step forward, clutching a serving platter to her chest. "We're family. This is just a misunderstanding. We were just—" "I said drop them," Adam cut her off. The sound was like a hammer hitting a steel peg. "Sit your asses down on that sofa. The cops are coming up the porch. Don't make them pull their tasers." Denise's face turned a mottled, ugly purple. "You can't do this. We have a key. We're allowed to be here." "That key ain't permission," Adam snapped. "It's evidence." The officers moved in then. The living room went from a private sanctuary to a crime scene in 10 seconds. I watched the black and white feed as the handcuffs clicked shut on Mason's wrists. The sound was thin through the speaker, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in years. Are you still with me? Because this is the moment where the family excuse finally hits a brick wall. If you've ever had to call the law on your own blood just to keep what's yours, hit that like button. I want to see a no trespassing in the comments if you're done letting people walk over your boundaries just because you share a last name. We're standing our ground today. By the time I made it home, the driveway was quiet. The sirens were gone. The only thing left was the smell of ozone and the cold October wind rattling the screen door. Adam was sitting on the porch steps, a stack of legal papers in his hand. "They're processed," he said, handing me the top sheet. It was a 12-month restraining order. Mason was facing a felony trespassing charge and a court-ordered stint of community service. He wouldn't be taking the lead on anything but picking up trash on the side of the interstate, and the fallout didn't stop there. Tiffany, Mason's wife, had finally seen enough. She'd spent the afternoon at a lawyer's office filing for legal separation. The Calloway empire wasn't just crumbling, it was being demolished by its own weight. I looked at the blue and white porcelain set sitting back on the dining table. One of the plates had a hairline fracture near the rim, a permanent scar. A reminder that some things, once broken by the people you trust, can never be made whole again. I walked to the front door and looked at the lock. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare key the police had recovered from Denise, and dropped it into the trash can. "The perimeter is closed, Adam," I said. But as I looked down the street, I saw a familiar sedan idling at the corner. My parents. They weren't coming to help. They were coming to beg for the criminals. I didn't open the door. I just turned off the porch light and left them in the dark. 3 days after the handcuffs clicked shut on Mason's wrists, the white flag finally went up. It didn't come with a ceremony. It came through a cracked speaker on my desk at the base. The caller ID said, "Dad." I didn't pick up until the fourth vibration. I pressed the phone to my ear, staring out the window at a line of transport trucks idling in the rain. I didn't say hello. I just waited. The sound that came through wasn't my father's voice. It was a jagged, wheezing breath. The sound of a man who'd spent 38 years holding his breath and had finally run out of oxygen. Then Robert Calloway cried. It wasn't a quiet, dignified sob. It was a raw, wet sound, like gravel being turned over in a drum. My father, the man who'd stood by in a stupor while Mason bled me dry and Denise spat on my career, was breaking apart. He knew the score now. Mason was facing a felony. Denise was toxic waste. And because of the restraining order, because of the no trespassing signs now bolted to my fence, they were cut off. No more Mia. No more golden child fantasies. "Alex," he choked out, his voice sounding like broken glass. I can't sleep. I close my eyes and I see those cops. I see my daughter looking at me like I'm a stranger. I'm done, Alex. I'm done with the lies. You chose a side a long time ago, Dad, I said. My voice was a flat, gray line. Now you're just living with the bill. He didn't argue. He didn't defend Mason. He just hung up, the silence on the other end heavier than the crying. He'd surrendered. 2 hours later, the second coward showed up at my front door. My mother, Linda, was sitting in her old Buick in my driveway when I pulled in. She was alone. For the first time in my adult life, Aunt Denise wasn't in the passenger seat whispering orders into her ear. I walked up to the porch, didn't look at her, and unlocked the door. "Come in," I said. I didn't say, "Welcome." She followed me into the kitchen. The air in the house was still cold, still carrying the faint, metallic scent of the police presence from Monday. I moved to the counter and poured a cup of black coffee. I didn't offer her cream. I didn't offer her a chair. Linda sat down anyway. She looked small, shrunken. Her hands were wrapped around a ceramic mug so tight her knuckles were turning the color of bone. She stared at the dark liquid, her eyes tracking the tiny ripples every time her hands gave a pathetic little tremor. I let Denise talk for me since you were 15 years old, she whispered. She didn't look up. Every time she complained about your grades or your hair or your decision to enlist, I just nodded. I was scared of her, Alex. I was more scared of her blowing up the family dinner than I was of losing my own daughter. The admission was gutless. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said, and it made me want to vomit. She'd used me as a human shield for over 2 decades just so she didn't have to deal with her sister's temper. I ain't your priest, Mom, I said. I leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, my back as straight as a structural beam. And I don't need your confession. In the Army, we don't care why you deserted your post. We just care that you're gone when the shooting starts. I want to see Mia, she sobbed, a single tear splashing into her coffee. Please, she's all I have left now that Tiffany is gone. You want the prize without doing the work, I snapped. The sound of my voice made her flinch. You want the kid, but you still carry Denise's shrapnel in your pocket. That ain't gonna happen. This house is a no-go zone for the people who helped Mason rob me. That includes the people who watched it happen and said nothing. Linda looked up then. Her face was a map of red splotches and deep, tired lines. What do I have to do? Tell me. I'll do anything. I didn't reach for a tissue. I didn't put a hand on her shoulder. Fix the damage, I said. In the military, we have a clear chain of command. You're either with the unit or you're an enemy combatant. There is no middle ground. You want a seat at Mia's table for Thanksgiving? You start by cutting the cord. I reached across the table, grabbed her smartphone, and slid it onto the glass top between us. It felt like a detonator. Open your contacts, I ordered. Her fingers shook so hard she almost dropped the phone. She swiped, her breath coming in shallow, panicked hitches. She found it. Denise. Block her, I said. Right now, right in front of me, Mason too. She'll come to the house, Linda whimpered. She'll scream. She'll tell everyone I'm a terrible sister. Let her, I said. You've spent 38 years being a good sister to a monster. Try being a mother for once, or don't. But if that phone stays open to them, you're dead to this house. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking like a countdown. Linda looked at the screen. She looked at me. For a second, I saw the old cowardice flicker in her eyes, the urge to run back to the safety of Denise's shadow. Then she thought of Mia. She thought of the porcelain plates Denise tried to steal. Her thumb moved. It was a slow, agonizing motion. She pressed the red block icon. Then she did the same for Mason. The screen flickered. The names shifted from the active list to the grayed-out void of the blocked folder. Click. The sound of her setting the phone back on the glass was the loudest thing in the room. It was the sound of a perimeter being closed. It's done, she whispered, her voice sounding hollow, like she'd just carved out a piece of her own chest. Good, I said. I picked up her cold coffee and dumped it into the sink. Now go home. I'll call you about Thanksgiving. But if I hear one word, one single whisper, that you've talked to them, the gate stays locked. Permanently. I walked her to the door. I didn't hug her. As she stepped out into the damp Pennsylvania evening, she looked back once. I didn't wave. I just closed the door and turned the deadbolt. The accomplices had fallen. The line was drawn. And as I looked at the calendar, I knew the real test was coming. Thanksgiving was in 10 days, and in this family, gravy was always served with a side of vengeance. 6 weeks since the sirens. 6 weeks since the blue and white porcelain was almost hauled away in a dirty, moving blanket. Thanksgiving in Pennsylvania is always gray. The sky looks like a bruised sheet of lead, and the wind smells of wet pavement and dead oak leaves. But inside my kitchen, it was different. It smelled of butter garlic roasted turkey, heavy cream, and the sharp, earthy tang of sage stuffing. It was the smell of a home being reclaimed. There were no gold-leafed menus today. No 30-person guest list filled with cousins who only showed up for the free bar. No oak room. Just my dining table. Solid, scratched, and real. I set the table for 5 chairs, 5 lives, 1 ceasefire. Adam stood at the counter, his large hands moving with a soldier's precision as he carved the turkey. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. Every time his eyes met mine, there was a steady, quiet strength there that Denise or Mason couldn't even dream of. He was my rear guard, always had been. Then the doorbell rang. Robert and Linda walked in like they were stepping onto a live minefield. My father didn't have his chest puffed out anymore. He looked smaller, his shoulders hunched under a worn flannel shirt. My mother clutched a store-bought pumpkin pie like it was a shield. She didn't look for Denise's shadow. She didn't check her phone. The silence of her blocked contacts was a ghost that sat between us as I took her coat. "Sit down," I said. My voice was level. No warmth, but no ice. Just a commander allowing a diplomatic envoy into the base. I served the meal on the blue and white porcelain, the very plates Denise and Mason had tried to steal. I watched my mother's eyes flicker as I set a dinner plate in front of her. She recognized the pattern. She felt the weight of the history. It was a reminder, a tactical display of who owned this territory now. We sat. The only sound for the first 10 minutes was the clink of silver against china and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. "The turkey it's real good, Alex," Robert mumbled. He chewed slowly, his eyes fixed on his plate as if he were trying to count the grains of salt in the gravy. He looked like a man who'd been eating drywall for 38 years and had finally tasted real food. "Adam did the brine," I said. "It's a good bird," Robert replied. That was it. The high point of the conversation. We talked about the weather. We talked about the local high school football game. Pathetic, safe topics meant to fill the void where a family used to be. Every time Linda looked at Mia, her eyes would well up with a desperate, hungry kind of regret. She wanted to reach out. She wanted to play the doting grandmother. But she was terrified of the perimeter I'd built. Mia was quiet, too quiet. She sat there in her yellow dress, her small fingers gripping her fork. She wasn't eating the mashed potatoes she usually loved. She was watching. She was scanning the table with that unnerving, clear-eyed honesty that only a 7-year-old has. She looked at her grandfather's trembling hands. She looked at the fake smile plastered on her grandmother's face. Halfway through the meal, the silence bomb finally dropped. Mia stopped moving. She set her silver fork down against the rim of her porcelain plate. Clink. The sound was tiny, but in that stifling room, it was as loud as a mortar tube firing. Every head at the table snapped up. Adam stopped carving. Robert froze with a piece of turkey halfway to his mouth. Mia didn't look at me. She didn't look at her dad. She turned her head and looked directly at Linda. "Grandma." Mia's voice was clear, rhythmic. It didn't have the whine of a child. It had the weight of a judge. Linda swallowed hard, a nervous, fluttering smile touching her lips. "Yes, sweetie. You want more pie?" "No," Mia said. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Linda's with a terrifying intensity. I was thinking about that big party, the one with the fancy chairs where everyone was yelling. The air in the room didn't just go still, it turned to stone. I felt Adam's hand tighten on the back of my chair. "Mia, honey, we're having dinner now." Linda started, her voice shaking. "I remember." Mia cut her off. She wasn't going to be redirected. "I remember when that man was screaming at Mommy and the lady with the mean eyes was clapping. I saw you, Grandma. You were sitting right there." Robert put his fork down. His face went gray. "You didn't say anything," Mia continued, her voice rising just enough to fill every corner of the kitchen. "Everyone was saying bad things to my mommy. They made her feel real small. And you just watched. You didn't even look at me." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't wipe them. She couldn't move. "Grandma," Mia whispered, and the honesty in her voice was a serrated blade. "Were you sad when they made Mommy feel small? Or did you just not care about us that day?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a catastrophic structural failure. I looked at my mother. I saw the 38 years of cowardice, the decades of keeping the peace at my expense, finally staring back at her through the eyes of a child who didn't know how to lie. There was no shutting up Mia. There was no respect your elders script that could fix this. The truth was on the table, right next to the turkey and the porcelain. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Robert. He was staring at the floor, his jaw working as he fought for a breath that wouldn't come. I sat back. I didn't help them. I didn't throw them a lifeline. I just watched my daughter finish the job I'd started 3 weeks ago. "Well, Grandma," Mia asked again, her head tilted to the side. "Why were you so quiet?" The ceasefire didn't just end. It evaporated. And as the first sob finally broke from my mother's throat, I realized that some wounds don't need a medic. They just need the light. The steam from the mashed potatoes rose in a lazy gray curl between us. It was the only thing moving in the room. Mia didn't look away. She sat there with her hands folded, her 7-year-old face a mask of terrifying clarity. Linda's fork remained suspended an inch above her plate. A bead of gravy dripped off the tines, hitting the blue and white porcelain with a wet, heavy thud. No Denise was here to bark an order. No Mason was here to suck the air out of the room with a drunken lie. For the first time in 38 years, my mother was trapped. She was pinned down by the one thing she'd spent her life running from: the truth, delivered by a child who hadn't learned how to hide it. Linda's lower lip began to vibrate, a frantic, rhythmic tremor that she couldn't mask behind a polite smile. A single tear escaped her left eye, cutting a jagged path through the foundation on her cheek and disappearing into the deep, tired lines near her mouth. She looked at Mia, then her eyes drifted to me. She looked like a prisoner realizing the gate had been open the whole time. "Mia." Linda's voice was a jagged whisper. It sounded like it had been dragged over miles of gravel. "Baby, Grandma was—" She stopped. She swallowed hard, her throat working against a knot of shame that had been decades in the making. She didn't look at Robert. She didn't look at the pie. She looked right into the soul of my daughter. "I was gutless," Linda said. The word hit the table harder than any shout. It was raw. It was American. It was the sound of a woman finally stripping off the armor of excuses. "I was so scared of Denise making a scene," Linda continued, her voice gaining a desperate, shaking momentum. "I was so tired of Mason's messes. I thought if I just stayed quiet, the storm would pass. I thought I was keeping the peace, Alex, but I wasn't. I was just letting them hunt you while I watched. I was wrong. I was so damn wrong to let them make you feel small." She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't reach for a tissue. She just sat there, her face wet, finally owning the decades of silence that had cost me my childhood and nearly cost me my daughter's respect. Across the table, Robert, the man who'd spent 40 years pouring concrete foundations but let his own family rot into the dirt, finally moved. He didn't say a word. Robert wasn't a man for speeches. He was a man of bone and gristle and the quiet, heavy work of a Pennsylvania laborer. He leaned forward, his right hand stained with the permanent gray of cement dust and etched with the scars of 1,000 cold mornings on a job site, reached out across the linen cloth. He gripped Linda's hand. Not a gentle touch. It was a squeeze, a claim. Then his left hand, rough as 40 grit sandpaper, reached out for mine. I didn't move. I looked at that hand. I looked at the man who had let me walk into a minefield alone for 38 years. I looked at the knuckles, swollen from age and hard work, and I saw the surrender in them. He wasn't hiding behind his stake anymore. He was standing in the gap. I reached out and let him take my hand. His grip was massive. It was hot. It was the weight of a father finally coming home from a war he'd been losing by default. He squeezed my fingers until they went numb, and I felt the tremor in his arm. It was a physical apology, a heavy, silent transmission of regret that no Hallmark card could ever carry. 30 seconds, I thought. In the Army, 30 seconds is a lifetime. It's the time it takes to reload a belt-fed machine gun. It's the time it takes for a medevac to touch down in a hot zone. It's enough time to change the entire geometry of a battlefield. We sat there in a three-way lock, Linda, Robert, and me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only music. The smell of the turkey was still there, but it didn't feel like a prop anymore. It felt like a meal shared between survivors. Mia watched us. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and picked up her fork. She'd seen the surrender. She'd accepted the terms. 1, 2, 3. I counted every heartbeat, every tick of the clock, every shallow, ragged breath Linda took. 10, 11, 12. The tension in the room didn't disappear. It transformed. It went from the brittle, snapping cold of a frozen pond to the heavy, crushing pressure of a deep sea dive. We were holding onto each other because the ground underneath us had finally stopped shifting. The lies were gone. Denise was a ghost on a blocked list. Mason was a name on a police report. 20, 21, 22. Robert's eyes were locked on mine. He didn't look away. He didn't blink. He was taking the hit. He was finally looking at the major, the daughter, the woman he'd let down, and he wasn't flinching. 28. 29. 30. Robert let go of my hand. He didn't pull back fast. He just eased the pressure, his fingers lingering for a split second on my skin before he retracted them to his own plate. He picked up his water glass, his hand finally steady. The treaty was signed. Not in ink, but in the sweat of a blue-collar kitchen. The war that had started when I was a girl, the one that had followed me to the desert and back, was officially over. I picked up my own fork and cut into a slice of turkey. The meat was cold now. The gravy had a skin on it. But as I took that first bite, it was the first thing I'd actually tasted in weeks. I looked at the blue and white porcelain. The fracture was still there, a thin black line running through the pattern. It would always be there. But as the wind rattled the kitchen window, I realized I didn't mind the crack. It just showed where the light was getting in. I set my fork down and looked at the clock. It was time for the next phase, late night, Pennsylvania. The first snow of the season didn't fall. It rattled against the window pane like dry salt. I stood in the dark kitchen, my forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching the yard vanish under a layer of white. The silence in the house was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating, toxic weight of Mason's lies or Denise's venom. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the smoke has finally cleared, the quiet of a perimeter that held. Robert and Linda had been gone for 2 hours. The block was still active on their phones, a digital wall they'd finally respected. The treaty was in place. But as I watched the dark road, I realized a truth that no manual in the army ever bothered to teach. Victory wasn't that night at the restaurant. It wasn't watching Mason grovel for a declined gold card or seeing Denise's face turn a mottled purple when the cops showed up at my front door. Those were just skirmishes. Those were just the sounds of a rotten structure finally giving way to the wind. Real victory was the 5 chairs. Real victory was the fact that when the walls came down, I was still standing, and I wasn't alone. Adam's boots thudded softly on the hardwood behind me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. He'd seen me through 3 deployments and a dozen family holidays that felt like combat missions. He reached out, his thick arms wrapping around my shoulders, drawing me back into his chest. He smelled like wood smoke and Tide detergent, the scent of a man who stays. He didn't offer a speech. He just stood there, a solid, immovable anchor in a world that had spent 38 years trying to drift away from me. "Perimeter's quiet," he whispered. His voice was a low rumble against my neck. "Quiet as a grave," I said. Most people are raised on a lie. They tell you that family is a holy word. They tell you it's a bond that can't be broken, a debt you owe just for breathing the same air as people who happen to share your DNA. They tell you that you gotta take the hits, gotta swallow the poison, just because you have the same last name. They're full of it. I learned the hard way that blood is just a biological coincidence. It's a roll of the dice in a dark room. You don't owe loyalty to a roll of the dice. You don't owe your soul to people who would trade your dignity for a cheap polyester suit or a bit of social leverage in a dying town. Family ain't something you're born into. It's a squad you handpick in the mud. I looked at the empty hallway. Mason was gone. Denise was a ghost on a blocked list. My parents were on a permanent probation. My family had shrunk from a noisy, crowded mess of backstabbers to a tight, efficient fire team. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lonely. I felt secure. As a commander, you learn that not everyone is fit for the unit. You have to be cold. You have to look at the weak links, the saboteurs, the ones who drain the morale of the troop just to feed their own ego. And you have to cut them loose. Tearing off their rank and stripping them of their authority over your life isn't a betrayal. It's a necessity. It's the only way to keep the people you actually love from getting caught in the crossfire. I eased out of Adam's grip and walked down the hall. My boots felt light on the carpet. I pushed open the door to Mia's room. She was out cold. Her breath was slow and rhythmic, the tiny innocent sound of a heart that didn't yet know how much the world could hurt. I leaned over and tucked the edges of her comforter, the one with the faded stars, under her chin. The room smelled like lavender and old crayons. I looked at her sleeping face and made a silent vow. I might have left my rifle at the armory, but the mission for this child's spirit is never gonna end. I spent my whole life being the good daughter. I spent years being the one who took the hits, so my mother wouldn't have to deal with a sister's screaming fit. I was a doormat with a rank on my shoulder. Mia won't be that. I'm gonna teach her that being nice ain't a virtue if it costs you your dignity. I'm gonna teach her that family is a title that has to be earned every damn day. I'll teach her that if someone makes her feel small, even if they're the ones who gave her life, she has every right to close the gate and walk away. I'm gonna teach her that submission ain't maturity, it's just slow-motion suicide. Major Alex Ross is signing off now. The campaign is over. The perimeter is secure, but I know I'm not the only one out there. I know there are thousands of you listening right now, sitting in a dark house, wondering if you have the right to say, enough. Wondering if you're a bad person for blocking a number or refusing to pay for another person's arrogance. You aren't a bad person, you're a soldier holding your own line. So, talk to me. Who's in your squad? Who's the person who stood behind you when your own blood walked away? Who is your chosen family? Drop their name, or just a yes, in the comments. Let the world know you aren't fighting this war alone. Hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to stop letting the past dictate your future. We're building a new unit here, and remember this because it's the only rule that matters in my house. Never, under any circumstances, pay for a party where you don't have a seat at the table. I'll see you on the next patrol.